Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the current scenario. We've seen the ECP issue a statement categorically saying that they do not see the elections moving further to perhaps mid-February. By latest, of course, they're going to try for it to happen by January with the delimitation procedure coming to a close by November. We've also, of course, overall seen the caretaker government at this time battling with issues of economy, inflation, of course, utility bills recently. We'll be talking about the overall political challenges for the caretaker government at this time, and also for political parties in terms of course, the PPP at this time, which seems to be distancing itself from the earlier coalition of 12 parties we saw in the government. Is that really happening? We'll also be talking about, of course, the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif Saab's imminent return, the party preparations for it, and the work going on with his return in mind as far as the PMLN is concerned. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Saif Jamshed Baryar, who's a political analyst. Thank you for being with us today. We also have with us Dr. Nasir Iqbal, who's head PIDE Macro Policy Lab. Thank you for being with us today. And we also have with us Dr. Niaz Murtaza. Thank you for being with us, Niaz sir. Saif, like we were earlier saying, it seems to be, it's very challenging at this time, whether it's a caretaker government of whatever duration. In the background of the statement of the ECP, it doesn't look like a very long delay for the elections. But overall, regardless of that, the challenges are not just the elections as far as the caretaker government is concerned. They do also have to keep things afloat. And this is a very difficult time for the country as a whole. How do you look at it?
Thank you for having me today here, Mahrukh. I genuinely believe that currently, politics aside, not being from any particular political party, a political analyst spectrum is to see things as they are, not as how certain political parties want things to be. Now, the real deal of circumstances is that we are living in times of stagflation right now. And it's not even inflation, it's something that's leading on to hyperinflation. And I was just informed while I went to the gas refilling station that there's another hike once again. So the fact of the matter is that the burden of inflation is a real deal for the government, and elections, because there's a constant tussle between the presidency and there's this election commission of Pakistan, then there's this caretaker government that has got a subsidiary role. The elections commission of Pakistan is the primary lead to take in whenever the elections are to be decided. And I think the last news that came in just moments ago was that the delimitations process, rather than being completed in December, now it has been shifted back to November.
Yes.
So I think that gives a breathing space to all the political parties. Because Nayyab Bukhari Saab concern yesterday was that I think elections need to be happening in 90 days. But we need to see the entire political spectrum right now. The People's Party, like earlier you said that it has distanced itself from the PDM alliance. I think People's Party had decided to distance itself from the very day the government was about to complete the tenure. Because in the last speech, you remember, Bilawal Bhutto Saab in the parliament did accept the fact that the PDM government had failed in many promises that it had promised to deliver to the public.
A government they were very much part of.
Yeah, they were very much part of.
He was a minister himself.
So maybe they were paving forward their political front, or they were paying forward their political foundation, that what really happened during the 1.5 years of PDM's tenure, we were divorced from it. Let
me come back to you. Niaz Saab, I'll come to you for economy in just a little bit. I'm going to go to Dr. Niaz Saab. Niaz Saab, taking ownership of the last year and a half, whether the PPP chooses to do that or not, of course, what happened in the last 1.5 years, the efforts, whether it was Shehbaz Sharif Saab at the helm of affairs or not, are going back to the IMF program, trying to ensure that we complete the 6th review, all of those, 9th review, all of those things are right there. As far as the ECP issue is concerned, do you think things are now clearer that we are not going for, we're not looking at a long delay?
Hello. Yeah, sorry, I had some trouble hearing you. I think it's a bit better now. Well, I think, it's becoming a bit clearer that, it's not going to be, an open-ended delay. The announcement that the Election Commission of Pakistan has made today, that it has been able to shave off 2 weeks, does suggest that there is some move towards holding elections sooner rather than later. Of course, any delay is unfortunate, because the constitution very clearly says that elections should be held in 90 days, and it's not clear that new delimitations are needed after a census which hasn't changed the seats in the provincial proportion of the seats. But given all that, the sooner the elections are held, the better it will be for everybody, because as you were talking about, the economic situation is so bad, and you can't really expect much from an interim government which is just there for 3 months, which doesn't have full powers. So the sooner we have a fairly elected government which can take some of the tough decisions, which has political backing across the whole country, the better it will be for Pakistan and for
Nasir, one of the things that Niaz is talking about, he's saying that political decisions, difficult decisions that a political government can then take. Don't you think the caretaker government is taking some very difficult decisions?
Yeah, I think if we look into the recent phenomena of disinflation and the weak economic situation of the country, I think there are three perspectives of this whole issue. One is economic side, another is the political side, and the third one is administrative issue. So we are lacking in all these three pillars. On the economic side, there is a gap between supply and demand. There is a shortage of supply. There is a flood continuously over the last few years. There is an international phenomena, and also there is the war between Russia and Ukraine would also feed into the crisis. The next important part is the political decision making. As you rightly said, though the current government, the caretaker government, might taking some decision to pull economy, pull this whole scenario out of this crisis, but the real issue with this, the political setup, is the uncertainty. The other two speakers are also talking about the certainty of the election. Though I'm not asking that it would be within 90 days, it would be within 60 days, but whatever the appropriate date, they must announce it. That will give a positive message not only to investor, also to the businessman. Look, we are moving on the right direction. The third important component of this whole crisis is the administrative issues. Over the last, like as you said in the previous government as well, we are dealing with the lack of certainty in our policy making process. One day we have one policy, another day we have another policy, and that lead to uncertainty in the situation.
Do you think there are substantial changes in policy after the caretaker government has come in? Can they really have substantial changes in your
No,
opinion?
they can't. The first is like the reforms is some sort of long-term phenomena. And for reform, you need a political support as well as the support from the nation. And the caretaker government don't have these type of leverage. They can just play with the existing environment. They can just run the economy within the existing environment. Secondly, they can't take a bold decision because they don't have any backing. So the lack of backing would compel them to take only minor decisions, and on that front they are also struggling, because if you look into the way the finance minister talk about that we inherited a very weak economy, that's the true situation, but the foreign minister, you have to give the solution, and we are lacking in those solutions.
The question is, do we have quick solutions at all in the kind of mess that we're in?
Yes. Of course, we are not hopeless. There is always a possibility to address those issues within the short term. So let me give you the one example. Like over the last few days, we are struggling with the issue of this electricity crisis. That also feed into the inflation.
Yes.
Also, the oil prices. On the oil prices side, we don't have a control because it linked with the international market. It linked with the value of the dollar. But how we are managing this fuel electricity issue is out of like, we can't say anything how they are managing. The only condition that IMF imposed is to recover the cost of electricity, and there are ways to recover those costs. One is to stagger it out, maybe only putting like recovering the full cost within the one stick, you can
You
make
think-
it a phase by. Secondly, we are recovering like the distribution loss from the consumer. Why? That should be owned by the WAPDA and the other distributing company.
But
Why
isn't
we
it
are-
true that WAPDA itself has about what, that there is a gap of what, 960 billion, if I'm not wrong, between their revenue and what they have to pay back.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not completely. WAPDA itself is dealing with a lot of challenges at this time. The line losses, the theft, all of those things, and those have been there for a long time before the caretaker government.
Yeah, those are there, and there is no quick solution. And over the last few years, PIDE
Right,
has
they
done
do
a
come
lot of studies on it, how we can address this energy issue, because that is the backbone of this entire inflation crisis. If you address this energy crisis, that on one hand gives some sort of support to your consumer in terms of improving their purchasing power. On the other hand, it will give a confidence to your business. They can increase their production and can be instrumental in terms of reducing your inflation. But on those front, we are not working. The current government just take like couple of steps they can do. They can reduce.
Let me come back to you.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Saif, sir. Saif, overall, of course, the challenges have been there for a while. If we talk about reforms, which is what Niaz mentioned, if we talk about the long-term solutions that Dr. Nasir is talking about, successive governments have unfortunately failed to work towards those solutions. And one government, I don't think we can lay the blame at one. And I think this is what the caretaker Prime Minister also said. He said that there are we've been unable, the inability of the last government, which was led by I think the former Prime Minister from the PTI, was unable to place those reforms. We haven't seen reforms in specific fields. For example, judicial reform. For example, with this government, we also saw the Parliament and the Supreme Court that, the comments today by Mansoor Ali Shah Sahab on the legislation that was undertaken also are right there in front of us. So overall, with institutional reform, I think has been on the agenda for a while. So there are numerous issues, isn't that true?
Absolutely, Mahrukh. If I talk about the issues that there are right now, I'll be very honest. Countries do not face issues overnight. It's a reality. And no particular macroeconomic structure would be facing certain issues that only happen over a successive time period of 2 to 3 years of maybe consecutive inconsistency in political policy or economic policy. The actual issue started off in 1994 and 1995, and that is when, for the very first time, the People's Party government, they had struck these agreements with electricity services providers, and it was all based on petrol-based consumption. Then there were other agreements in 2004 and 14 and 15 happening during the time of PMLN. Then it was PTI's inability to owe up to the obligations of the International Monetary Fund. Now, over here, I would like to inform the audience a bit that the International Monetary Fund has a particular way of working. And that way, it's very much universal in every economy. The IMF doesn't really look at what the macroeconomic conditions of a country are. They're least bothered when it comes to poverty figures over there. They're not really bothered when it's come to human development indicators. All that they want is that they'd be giving in a money supply, and that money supply is to be recovered by the donor agency in a particular period of time. And for that, they will be calling in certain shots that apply corrective mechanisms to the overall macroeconomic structure.
Okay.
Now, the very first thing is that they say that you cannot adjust the dollar. So the State Bank of Pakistan even cannot adjust the dollar, and it has to move in a free floating way in the markets. So that is where the first problem comes in. The over dependency of governments in Pakistan since the past 30 years has relied upon international financiers rather than attracting local money supply. That's the first problem. And the second thing is, now automatically, when the macroeconomic variables are not in favor of recovery, that comes along with immediate recovery methodologies. And immediate recovery methodologies are that you eliminate subsidies on the power sector and you impose taxes, and we know that almost 10 to 12 different surcharges are being applied on the average electricity consumer right now. And the third thing is, most of the power agreements of generation that we've had with IPPs, unfortunately, they have been on dollar terms.
Okay.
They have not been in rupee terms. So this really calls for the fact that maybe it is time for all the political stakeholders in the country to at least sit for an economic charter, if not a political charter at least. Because we see very much clearly that a political charter maybe happened during the PDM's time, but after the government of PDM went away, People's Party has taken another direction. That is a direction of 90-day elections.
And we also saw the People's Party. I'm going to go to Niaz also, but we saw the BPP become a part of the Council of Common Interest meeting to agree to delimitation, which a natural consequence has been the delay of a couple of months.
Absolutely.
And now for them, the moment the government has, it's the caretaker government has come in place, they are coming and they're talking about the constitutional requirement.
They've taken a polarity.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so politicking itself and using we saw the last government also, if we talk about PTI, use politicking, and I think that is a natural consequence of having any political stake in the country. But to what extent and how far do you take it? I think I want to talk about this. Niaz, how far, in your opinion, is it okay to take politicking? Because whether it's the cipher or whether it's the I think we've had this conversation before, but I think it goes to the very root of our political system. If anything is sacred at all, for our political parties. Of course, we talk about politics and we say this is just politics. Changing your stance is just politics. Today you can say something, tomorrow, in the interests of your own political gain, you might decide to go in another direction. But a lot of it is becoming more obvious to the public, is it not?
Well, I think the most crucial part is, the condition of the country. Of course, politicians always do some degree of politicking, not just in Pakistan, even India, Bangladesh, USA. But the situation right now is so critical and so bad. We are, just standing near an abyss where, even a slight shock from the global economy could just, send us over the cliff. So, this is where you can't say, okay, politicians will be politicians. I think they have to, show more maturity. They have to realize, where they've brought the country, and they must realize that, business as usual is not going to work. And I can say that, that the government that comes in after this election will have a crucial role in, trying to stem the rot. If this is also a business as usual government, which follows the same policies that we've been following for the last decade, I can say the new Pakistan that emerged after 1971, every regime since then has, adopted atrocious policies. There's not one regime that I can say, look, what good policies. So how long can this continue? And, right now we are just at the abyss. Whoever may have done it, it will be the responsibility of the new government. It may be the last government, which will have some scope, some space to, try to stem the rot. Otherwise, after that, if we have another 3 or 4 years of business as usual, then, you just can't say where we will end. Sri Lanka's example is before us. The huge inflation it had, it, failed to pay its debt, and, it ran out of petrol, transport stopped. So we are headed towards that way. And whichever government comes into play after.
What if it's not, one would want, of course, a strong government. But the kind of scenario at this time, the way things look, do you not think that, if there is a weak government in place, weak, I mean, in terms of numbers, of course, won't it be very difficult for them to have, to make sure that, those amendments, those decisions that we talk about, hard decisions, it will become more difficult, no?
Well, that's why, it requires maturity. The opposition can very well say, okay, it's a very weak government, we will not cooperate with it, we will let it collapse. But it will not be just the collapse of this particular regime, it could even be the collapse of, the country. So they have to realize, they have to agree on, a certain charter of governance, and it has to be broader than just a charter of economy, because our economic problems are so tied with our political problems, social problems, security problems, foreign policy problems, that, on a basic few issues covering all these dimensions, they have to come to an agreement that, whether we are in the government or whether we are in opposition, we all agree that these painful economic steps have to be taken, these painful security steps have to be taken, and we will support the government whether we are part of the coalition or not. So, that is the kind of maturity that is expected. And the other thing is they have to, really, really emphasize competence in their cabinet. It should not be, business as usual, just putting all your friends, all your family into key positions. They have to have a balance between that, the politics, as well as competence. We need competent, technocratic, inputs as well, but we should not go for a technocratic government. But the political government that comes in should make sure that it has sufficient competence within its cabinet. Like India after 1991, that's what they had. It was Congress which, instead of say Sonia Gandhi become prime minister, she made Narasimha Rao, and then later on Manmohan Singh as the prime minister. So that's what we need. Put your personal agenda on the backside and appoint competent prime ministers, finance minister, industry ministers, and 5 or 6 other key ministries.
Let me come back to you. Saif, do you think it's going to be as simple as that? I mean, of course, competence is important. Of course, we need competent people at the helm of affairs. There's no denying that. But it's the same people. We saw what happened with the PDM is an amalgamation of 12 political parties with one other political party sitting out. Whether you talk about them, whether a lot of people have left the PTI also. Overall, the amalgam of whatever comes out, it's the same people invariably, no?
Absolutely, it's the same people, just in different political parties. That is it. That is how governance has been in Pakistan. And I think I'd agree with Dr. Niaz Saab, as he said, that every time they fill in incompetent people around them within cabinets, I think democracy is a lot about competency as well. Democracy is a lot about awareness as well. When I, as the average voter, am plugging in my vote, I'm plugging in my vote for certainty, I'm plugging in my vote for competence, and I'm plugging in my vote for consistency combined with competence. I think without consistency, you can never be competent. Now, unfortunately, currently, if you look at what is really happening in the political optics, they're incredibly depressive. People's Party wants the elections within 90 days. Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf as a party is totally dismantled, disillusioned, and they're actually waiting for somehow for Mr. Khan to get a bail, and then he can reorganize the party, or he can collectivize the scattered voter base. And what is PMLN doing at the time? PMLN has simply shifted the blame to entirely the judicial circles that have gone by. And I firmly believe that even PMLN is waiting for certainty themselves as well, that they're waiting for Mia Saab to arrive and maybe to reorganize the party and to secure the voting base that once had went, the swing voter that had went to PTI. Mahrukh, honestly, at this particular time, I am seeing the collapse of parliamentary democracy because of these political parties. And these political parties, because of their own political centers or their political centric approach that has restricted them to particular provinces or consolidation of provinces, I think the ultimate idea of the political federation is getting weak. And there is no dialogue within the superstructures that I see at the time. A democracy is based on, number one, parliamentary competence, and it is based on the idea of parliamentary democracy. Number second, governance is based on political electives, and it is based on civil bureaucracy and military bureaucracy. And number third, there comes an idea of dispensing justice. That is what the judiciary is to do. So I think all the stakeholders, whether they're political, they're economic, they're legal, they're judicial, they need to come at one page for at least one thing. That is having a charter to at least addressing the issues of the common man out there. The common man is not even looking up to the elections. Yes, he's looking for certainty, but he's looking for certainty that will he be able to afford the educational fees for his daughter? He's looking at certainty that will he may be able to fill in his car tank. He's looking for certainty that will the fans be running or the lights be running in the next month.
Do you think for the common man that's linked to, let me go to Nasir Saab.
Sure, please.
Nasir Saab, of course, you're an economic expert in that regard, but do you think for the common man all of that certainty is linked to elections?
Yes, if we look into there are two common phrases we use. One is the red line and another is the charter. So if we look into the way how these manipulate our economic system, how they link with the disaster that we are currently facing. As you know, we have a minus growth, we have 30% plus inflation, massive unemployment, high tariff, and also the energy crisis is there. So the red line is that now we are basically testing another economic model to this by using this caretaker government. And the red line is that we have predefined power, function and rules of each and every stakeholder. But each and every stakeholder is not following their own discipline, but they are intervening in the function of the other, and we assume that I'm a perfect man, I can do anything. And I think that if we look into the charter, to me the important one is charter of prosperity. Prosperity for the common man. For that we have to follow three charter. One is charter of power, the another is charter of democracy, and the third one is charter of economics. Until unless we have an agreement on these three charters, the common man will suffer.
Agreement between all political parties, or agreement between a parliament that is voted in and the
agreement between all stakeholders.
Okay.
So I'm not asking about the political parties,
You're
all
saying
stakeholders.
okay, fair enough.
It could be like a judicial, it could be any other form of like a central authority that controls so many power, and it could be the political parties. So they must have a common agreement on the agenda of prosperity. So then they will follow this entire, and we have to allow these political party to become mature. Until unless we stop by intervening within their domain, we may not allow them to mature. These are the good examples we have from the neighboring country, from the Bangladesh, from the India. They allow their democracy to grow. That would ultimately lead to a stable economic environment.
And you're saying that we should be willing to pay the cost.
Yeah, and the PIDE study show that this political instability would lead to 3% loss of GDP. And if we only assume that 3%, that would be enough to actually curtail our poverty from 25-30% to less than 20%.
Let me
this would be the way forward.
Niaz Sahab, I hope you heard what Dr. Nasir is saying. He's talking about certainty. He's talking about agreement. He's talking about a charter of prosperity. We saw, in terms of polarization, unfortunately, our polarization has not only been curtailed to the political realm. It's now transcended into the judicial circles also. You saw the comments today by Justice Mansoor Ali Shah also. Unfortunately, there is polarization all around. There is institutional polarization. I don't know if that's a word or not, but it's something that we are seeing at this time. How then do you think there's going to be a charter of prosperity at all?
Well, economic problems are very concrete and easy to see. There's, the inflation rate there, there's the unemployment rate there, and this and that, the rupee value. But, these institutional things, are much more difficult to, look at and quantify. But we can say, our institutional base is as collapsed as our economy right now. If there was a measure of, institutional collapse like the inflation rate, the value of the rupee, it would show the same kind of, nosedive as the rupee and inflation are showing. And, and that's why, the economic situation is really so bad. And that's why I say a charter of economy is too narrow to help save Pakistan. What you need is something much broader. It has to be a charter of politics, it has to be a charter of governance, economics, security issues, how to deal with terrorism, what kind of foreign policies we have. Everything is in a mess. We have to find a place for us in the global economy. So somebody has to come with a creative vision. It's not just about reform, cut these subsidies, cut that subsidies. It's about a new vision for the country of how it's going to fit into the global economy, the global politics, because the way we've been fitting in for the last several decades has been extremely poor. Try to get dole outs from the big powers, aid, instead of making our economy productive, fighting wars for big superpowers. So everything is in a shambles, not just the economy, security, foreign policy, politics. And this is why I say the new government that will be coming in the next 3-4 months, whenever, this may be the last chance for Pakistan to try to stem the rot. Otherwise, we are going to, end up with Sri Lanka is still not bad, because all they had was an economic problem that they were able to overcome. We could slide much worse because, we have security problems, we have political problems. We could go the way of Yemen or Syria. Let's hope it doesn't happen. But, for all that, the next government that comes in will be an extremely critical one. If it doesn't able to, stem the rot, then I don't know where it's going to end up.
Fair enough. Saif, I think Niaz essentially agrees with what Dr. Nasir is saying. He's saying there has to be an across-the-board, charter, and whether one calls it the Charter of Prosperity, which is a great word, I think, that Nasir Sahab has used, but it has to be across the board and it has to be between all stakeholders. That's a great goal for us to achieve. But again, my question is, are we anywhere near to achieving it in the kind of polarization that exists at this time?
Mahrukh, I believe that the only answer to that would be absolutely not. We're not anywhere near to it. There's a reason for it. There's a reason that all these things are very good while talked of in theory. But the practical application of such things is that we live in a country of ethnic diversity. We live in a country of a mindset where provincialism always has been very strong.
We're not very far away from the Janawala incident.
Yeah, we're not very far away from that as well. And when we talk about trying to bring prosperity into a country, I think every nation in the world would want prosperity. I think that is something every individual, by the very instinct of their nature, by the very process of their nature, they'd want that. But the idea is that when you try to aggregate the preferences of priority and preferences of prosperity, they might be very subjective. Prosperity is a subjective reality for you, it's a subjective reality for me. What might be the notions of a true political democracy and what might be a notion for a true political democracy might be very different for both of us.
But
and in similar fashion.
I think we're talking about a baseline prosperity, right? For people to be able to manage their day-to-day existence, for them to be able to live where they don't, we've seen recently the kind of challenges that people are suffering, economically certainly, but also in other areas.
I think when we talk about prosperity at the baseline, then I think the very first notion would be to establish somewhat of economic balance. And I think the income inequality gap, I think Dr. Saab would be better would be better at making an assessment on that. But the income inequality and the divide that I see in Pakistan right now itself is a very major crisis for the future. With a very baseline of prosperity, at least you need to give out the benefits of capitalism to the common man. Now, if you are further burdening the common man with surcharges and taxes on everything they consume, from the consumer basket to electricity, from petrol to everything that's related, it brings about, or it rather cancels the effect of GDP growth rate, because the poverty would be striking out that growth rate itself. So for countries and communities, as long as their GDP is rising to the figures of relative poverty, and as long as their GDP is rising compared with the levels of the loans that they're taking, it's absolutely fine. But unfortunately, in the past 5 years, we are seeing a constant collapse of the gross domestic product as well. And what is the dilemma right now? You're exporting maybe $32 billion US, right? And you're importing $82 billion US. Now this shortfall is almost of $45 to $50 billion US, right, Dr. Saab? And this shortfall is helped by remittance money, that is 30 billion. What about the other 12 billion? Now, it's not only about going to the IMF right now or international financiers, and keep in mind that international financiers always eye to the IMF. When IMF approves a particular loan money, then the international financiers get the hope that, all right, our money is safe. So right now, the baseline of prosperity is economy. This is my personal narrative, and it's fiscal stabilization, it's monetary stabilization, and it's this immediate collectivizing of political parties over economic aggregates rather than political aggregates. Because if you go towards political aggregates, I think it'll take about 5 to 10 years for political parties to come to a solution that what political aggregates can be the aggregate of a common political interest. This is what I believe in.
Nasir Saab, do you agree? You think that, we can, of course, I think economy is a huge part of what we are facing at this time. And for there to be, do you think it's possible, perhaps it's possible to have an across-the-board agreement on it?
Yeah, of course it's possible, because that we are at the very bottom of the whole pyramid. So there is no further sliding in this current scenario. If you look into the GDP figure, we have a minus GDP figure. The country, those population growth is around 3%. We at least required 5 to 6% GDP growth to sustain, and we are moving at the 0%. And again, the inflation is, and that give an indication that we have to converge. And for that convergence, maybe the starting point would be the central authority. That could give us some sort of a hope and breathing space to all other stakeholders. Look, this is the way forward. And as the other speaker are mentioning that the IMF, we can blame to IMF to some extent, but IMF never be a party in terms of our disaster. IMF basically is some sort of injection. You are dying and you need a quick remedy. For that, IMF give you an injection. But our problem is like structural, long term, and we need a domestic solution. For example, I'll give you the one example. As said that there is a gap between our import and export. We need some sort of to encourage those small businesses that can be used as a substitute to those imports. For example, we have like a massive reliance on palm oil. We have a massive reliance on the
Nasir Saab,
fuel.
again we're going to be talking about sectors that have historically been criticized for governments not taking as much interest in them as they should be. For example, agriculture being one of them. But again, the challenge is whether we can actually get into them, whether we can have those reforms that are needed in those particular sectors. And that is consistently we've not been able to do it.
For reform, the one thing is very clear, it requires a time. And we didn't give a time to these political parties to actually implement their agenda. We can blame them at the end of their tenure. The people can judge their performance, but at the end of tenure, if we terminate their tenure in the mid of the way they always talk about that, look, we were in the position to implement these reforms, but we were curtailed to implement those type of reforms. Then it is easy for these people to blame actually the previous government, to the other people, that they didn't allow us to implement. And that would be the one way. For the political stability is core for all things. We have to start from scratch, and we assume that this would be our first year of independence, and we have to start from the scratch. For that, we have to decide on one thing, that every player should work in their own domain. Unless we put some sort of red line on this clause, we may not be able to revive.
Fair enough. Let me go to Niaz Saab with last question. I think we're nearly out of time. Niaz Saab, I think one of the things very relevant what Nasir Saab said, he said every player must walk within their own domain. What are your comments about the recent, we talk about institutional integrity, what we've seen as far as the superior courts are concerned. That's also something that one would have hoped could have been avoided, because there is an institutional integrity. There is now we've also seen two institutions like the Parliament and the Supreme Court to be we've seen a certain acrimony, if for the use of a better word, that's been clear. So how do you look at those things?
Well, yeah, it's unfortunate, but the thing is, no institution has really come out with flying colors. You can find examples of where the Supreme Court sort of behaved improperly and infringed upon the domain of the Parliament, for example 63A. But then you also find cases of Parliament or the executive infringing upon the constitutional rights of the Supreme Court to give its opinions, like for example the delay in KP and now the delay in the national poll. So no institution, whether it's PTI, PDM, Supreme Court, Election Commission of Pakistan, Presidency, you can make a list of constitutional violations from all of them. That's why the new elections, after that a lot of these figures will change, and it will be a chance for the country to, redeem itself. And if you look globally, our situation today is as bad as, other large countries like China in 78, Russia in 89, Indonesia after Suharto, India in 91. Huge countries in big mess, but they were able to, overcome them, rose from the ashes, and all four of them are doing much better. So it will be a chance for Pakistan, the new government, to do the same.
Right, fair enough. Thank you so much for being with us. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you for joining us, Saif, Jamshed, Baryar Sahab. Thank you for being with us. Dr. Nasir Iqbal, thank you for joining us. Dr. Niaz Murtaza, thank you for your time. Overall, I think one of the terms I would like to repeat is a charter of prosperity. And I think that's very relevant. Perhaps we can somehow come to some kind of a charter of prosperity with all major stakeholders, with an eye on the future and an eye for reform. Whether we do that after the elections, the sooner the better. Let's hope that we can work towards that kind of a charter where we can actually move towards the kind of prosperity for the common man. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.